Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. Things are heating up in the world, as always. It looks like another time we've got a lot of stuff going on. Putin is doing aggressive things against the Ukraine. You probably saw about that. The Ukrainians are on full alert. They've put in martial law. Could there be a war? Well, probably not, but what do we do to Putin and how do we slow him down? Well, everybody's got to be concerned about that. And the Republicans notched another one. They've got 53 now in the new Senate, which gives them some extra. So they won't have to be kowtowing to a couple of holdouts. They've got enough majority to bring through some significant things. But anyhow, how are you? Glad to see you.
I'm doing very well. I was in Charleston, South Carolina yesterday. It was gorgeous. Walking along the Battery in those old...
What were you doing in Charleston?
We were doing a 700 Club shoot for the January telethon. We were doing some man-on-the-street interviews, and we got some great responses. We were asking people about fear and anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
So that's going to be what we're going to be talking about during telethon. And a lot of believers down there. Of course, a lot of people from out of town. And then I'm coming back, and I'm in the Atlanta airport, and guess who I run into? Your son, Tim. Who
I'm sure had been off.
And he's so tall. So, you know, he's your tallest child, I guess. Anyway, so I'm like, I think that's Tim Robertson. So I went over to him. I said, Tim, hey, you know, where you been? And where are you coming from? He's like, Texas. I've been duck hunting. So he and my...
Unbelievable. He just got back from... Israel, and then he goes immediately to Europe, where he's doing shooting in England and Scotland. Then he comes back to Hot Springs for a few days, spends time, then he takes off and jets down to Texas to, man, the playboy of the Western world. Wouldn't it be nice to be like your son and you know, all you have to do is play. I've got to work. I don't know what it is.
Well, good for Tim. Keep duck hunting.
Keep duck hunting. All right. Well, signs of change are happening in the Middle East. Some Muslim nations are beginning to shift their stance toward Israel. As a matter of fact, some of the people there say we'd rather live under the Jewish state, under Israel, than under the Palestinian Authority. You know, people can be executed for selling land to a Jew. If a Muslim sells land in the West Bank to a Jew, he is subject to death. We're talking about draconian stuff going on. Can they live together? Well, of course they can, and Scott Ross will show you why. Wendy?
Yeah, U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman talked about those changes with Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell. Their wide-ranging interview also touched on the growing danger of Iran and why evangelical support is so important to Israel.
Only one U.S. ambassador in history holds the distinction of serving in Israel's capital, Jerusalem, David Friedman. Now he sits at the epicenter of a Middle East going through historic changes, a much-needed peace plan, and as we found out, unprecedented relations between the two allies.
The Trump administration is the most supportive administration with regard to Israel in American history. And I think that's helped Israel in direct ways.
A widely anticipated peace plan remains shrouded in secrecy, although Friedman explained one of its guiding principles.
Nobody should be asked to take incremental security risk in pursuit of something that has yet to bear fruit. So we're very cognizant of Israel's security needs.
Are the new regional alliances that seem to be emerging between Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Jordan, Egypt, and Israel, is that part of the calculation?
It's all opening up. And I think it's just beginning. And I think that environment, creates opportunity. And I think it gives the Israeli public some confidence that they're not being asked to jump into an empty pool.
Another marker of the Trump administration is change. During his address at the start of the Jewish New Year, Ambassador Friedman talked about slaying some of the sacred cows of the peace process, like defunding UNRWA, the right of return, and the so-called pay to slay, rewarding terrorists and their families.
One other aspect that seems to be of the peace plan is the relationship with Palestinian businessmen and Israeli businessmen. And some would say you crossed the red line when you went to the green line in Ariel for the first time officially. What was the importance of that meeting?
On a practical level, I met with, 8 or 10 Palestinian business leaders, and to a person, what they all said to me is, let's do business, let's get going, let's do some work. We want to work with Jews, we want to work with Israelis.
Yet overshadowing any Middle East peace plan is Iran.
Iran is the danger. Iran right now is the leading international state sponsor of terrorism.
Friedman noted that new sanctions against Iran will make a difference.
They're extraordinary, and I think they are going to ultimately put the Iranian government in a position where they can end this malign activity, or they won't, and the sanctions will continue, and ultimately, I believe their regime will fail.
We also talked about why evangelical support is so important to Israel.
It strengthens the president's resolve to, I think, be the best president Israel has ever had.
An observant Jew, Friedman often sees his role through the lens of Scripture and showed me a constant reminder how he hopes to serve as ambassador, a painting of the sin of the 10 spies from Exodus.
I've got this painting to remind me that the one sin I hope not to commit while I'm here is the sin of the spies, not to have faith, confidence, and vision. I think those are the qualities that really are essential for me to do my job the right way.
And as a diplomat, Friedman sees God at work.
I try to look at everything from a lens of what is best for the United States. That's my job. I represent the United States. Look, we are a nation under God. We're built on Judeo-Christian values, and much as I try, I cannot help but see the majesty of God's work in all the miracles that happen in this incredible country.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the U.S. Embassy, Jerusalem.
What an amazing ambassador. What an amazing time. I tell you, giving away some of the myths. I mean, the whole concept of this two-state solution, it isn't going to work. You've got to have a partner in peace if you're going to make peace. And the Palestinian Authority has been overrun by Hamas. They're just in the grip of terrorists, and they're irrational, and they really don't have enough power to make peace. And I think our country needs to get along with the fact that they can't be two states over there, and let's get on with it and just support Israel, do what we can. Well, in other news, Republicans strengthened their hold on the Senate Tuesday night. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. Here's John.
That's right, Pat. In Mississippi, Republicans held a Senate seat after Cindy Hyde-Smith easily won over her Democratic challenger, Mike Espy. Hyde-Smith's decisive margin of 8 points came even after she made some verbal gaffes that brought the state's history of racism into play. Espy, though, faced challenges of his own, dogged by past allegations of corruption. The win cements the GOP lead in the Senate 53-47. Republicans made a net pickup of 2 Senate seats in the midterm elections. Well, the Trump administration will appeal a judge's order blocking its policy of denying asylum to immigrants who enter the United States illegally. The Justice Department plans to appeal the order to the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals. President Trump criticized that circuit last week as biased, calling the judge who ruled against him, quote, an Obama judge. Meanwhile, Democrats in Congress are opposing Republican efforts to meet President Trump's request for $5 billion to build a border wall. The president has threatened to shut down the government if he doesn't get the money. Well, the president's top economic advisor is taking a cautious tone as the United States and China prepare to meet at the G20 Economic Summit this weekend. Some in his administration are hoping the talks will delay implementation of new tariffs on China by the United States. Larry Kudlow says while the president is willing to negotiate, he's not backing off his commitment to hold firm on China.
The president said there's a good possibility that we can make a deal, and he is open to it. But on the other hand, if these conditions I mentioned a few moments ago are not met, not dealt with, the president has said, look, he's perfectly happy to stand on his tariff policies.
The administration plans to raise tariffs on some $200 billion in Chinese goods to 25%. Well, turning overseas in Eastern Europe, there are fears of a renewed fighting after Russia seized 3 Ukrainian ships. Thousands have been killed as a result of fighting between Russian separatists and Ukrainian nationals in the east. It all started when Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine in 2014. And as Dale Hurd reports, this latest flare-up could be part of a struggle over the Orthodox Church.
Is the brewing crisis between Russia and Ukraine the result of a turf battle between the Russian and Ukrainian Orthodox churches? Some say it could be. Vladimir Putin finally lost one, and he's angry. And that could be what was behind an incident on Sunday near Crimea, when Russian border guards rammed into and opened fire on 3 Ukrainian Navy vessels traveling from the Black Sea toward a Ukrainian port.
I believe that it is actually a desire for Putin to show who's in control of Crimea.
CBN's director for Russia and Ukraine, Steve Weber, believes the Russian action could have been Putin's angry response to the decision by the worldwide leader of the Orthodox Church to take Orthodox churches in Ukraine away from the control of the Russian Patriarch in Moscow.
It could be connected to what happened just a few weeks ago when this Bartholomew in Istanbul, with a stroke of the pen, took 12,000, a third of all of the churches under the Moscow Patriarch, and gave them to the Ukrainian Patriarch. This created anger in Putin. It's like you lost power over all of these, a third of his parishes.
Putin used Moscow's dominance over the 300 million person Orthodox communion to try to control Orthodox believers in Ukraine and boost his image as a leader. Weber says losing the Ukrainian churches was like kicking sand into Putin's face and frees Ukraine even more from the clutches of Moscow. Fearing war, the Ukrainian parliament has imposed martial law for 30 days, something Ukraine didn't do even when Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula in 2014 or sent troops into eastern Ukraine. Russia says it will send an anti-aircraft missile system into Crimea. The United States and its allies condemned the Russian seizure at the United Nations.
Sunday's outrageous violation of sovereign Ukrainian territory is part of a pattern of Russian behavior that includes the purported annexation of Crimea and abuses against countless Ukrainians in Crimea.
President Trump was scheduled to meet with Putin next week, but some sources say the president may cancel the meeting over the seizure of the Ukrainian ships. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thanks, Dale. Pat, back to you.
I think it's time to isolate Putin, and there are steps that could be taken against him. You can't just use rhetoric. You've got to do something. And I think cutting off banking relations with some of the companies that he deals with, he's an extremely rich man, and he's controlled the economy of Russia. And if the United States puts sanctions on some of those companies and forbids our banking system to deal with them, it'll bring Putin's allies against him, and he'll begin to say, okay, I'll behave myself. But this is, what happened, if you look back in history a little bit, Ukraine had some short-range nuclear weapons, and they gave them up. They said, our intermediate-range nukes, we'll surrender them on the promise of the fact that the NATO people, especially the United States, will guarantee our sovereignty. Well, under Obama, that promise was ignored, and they were reluctant to give arms and supplies. Now, Trump has been furnishing certain amounts of arms and supplies, but not nearly enough. Putin has a very powerful arm, and he's exercising it because he wants to control everything that used to be part of the old Soviet Union. And Ukraine was part of it. And the Ukrainians want to be independent of Russia, and it's going to be a difficult thing, but we certainly don't want war in that part of the country, nor do we want war with a country that has a huge arsenal of nuclear weapons. We don't want that. And so we need to take him up to the edge, but not go over the edge, because all they've got to do is push a button and suddenly they'll incinerate a number of our cities, and that will not be a pleasant prospect. So we have to deal with this very, very cautiously. But at the same time, we cannot allow him, little by little, he takes over the Crimea, then he takes over the Ukraine, then he goes after the Baltic countries, and he's got Lithuania and Estonia and Latvia, and he wraps them up back into his embrace. And then the next thing you know, he's after Finland. You've just got to be careful because he's an expansionist and he will take what he can get. Well, we've got to say, no, Mr. Putin, you can't have that. And we have to say it very forcefully and back it up with action. That's not going to be easy. John?
Pat, back here at home. The Tonight Show's Jimmy Fallon made a surprise announcement last night to a family affected by Hurricane Florence, one of many families helped by Operation Blessing. Terry and Divya MacArthur and their 12-year-old son were flooded out of their home during the hurricane.
For lack of a better word, it's a disaster. You know, some might refer to it as a nightmare. Romans 8:28 says all things work together for the good of those that love the Lord. So that's where I'm finding peace.
Operation Blessing gutted parts of the home and tore out wet flooring. During the demolition, the family was told the Tonight Show wanted to give a few hurricane victims a break from the disaster. So you can imagine the MacArthur surprise when Jimmy Fallon called them out during the show's taping in New York City.
Your house, a very special house. Why is it special to you?
Because my grandmother left it to me.
Your grandmother left it to you, and you had a tough couple of years, huh? Yes. You guys were hit, was it Hurricane Matthew, 2016, Hurricane Florence?
Yes.
And you have no flood insurance?
No.
Well, our friends at the Home Depot Foundation and their partner, Operation Blessing, heard about your story, and they want to help. Here's what they're going to do. They're going to come in, they're going to fix your home, they're going to fix your roof, they're going to repaint and insulate your house, they're going to provide a new furnace, appliances, redo your yard, and send in a Home Depot designer to refurnish your home. Congratulations. I can't imagine what you've been through. Our thanks to the Home Depot Foundation and Operation Blessing.
And as Divya said, all things work together for the good of those that love the Lord. A great and memorable day for them. Pat?
Isn't that marvelous? Well, it's so nice to see that Operation Blessing.
That was amazing.
Was that marvelous?
Yeah. Thank you, Jimmy Fallon. All right.
Well, thank you, them, and thanks, Operation Blessing, and thank you, folks, for as you participate with us, we're able to help others, and as you give, it'll be given unto you. So God bless you, and I'm sure that family appreciates what you've done.